Good afternoon. My name is David Marsh. I'm a retired professor of orthopaedics and I was the founding president of the FFN in 2011. Now my job is the chair of the regionalisation committee. From the beginning, we've always said that we are a network of activists, and our goal is consistent with the famous statement by Karl Marx that the point is not to comment or observe the world, but actually to change it. And that is what we set ourselves out to do from the beginning. We took the lead in defining what it actually means to change things in the field of fragility fractures in partnership with other organisations in this paper in Injury published in 2018. It defined an agenda for action. Its content can be summarised as these three clinical pillars, covering the principles that should govern acute co-management, rehabilitation and secondary prevention. All the elements of good post-fracture care. Plus there is a fourth pillar, a political pillar, which facilitates the achievement of the first three. So our strategy for how to change the world is basically regionalisation. Because although we can stimulate and educate each other internationally, it's been our experience all over the world that changing practice on a large scale happens on a national level, because you have to change healthcare policy. There's no such thing as international healthcare policy. And this is the reason why we need national FFNs, and national FFNs are the heart and soul of the strategy of regionalisation. In any given country, it's not the national FFN itself that makes policy change happen. The mainstream professional organisations need to collaborate with each other, and the FFN's job is to be the catalyst that makes that happen. The sad truth is that when one professional association seeks policy change, the government will assume that they're doing so out of self-interest. But when several associations speak with one voice, it is much more convincing. Still, FFN Global has an important job to do, despite the fact that the focus is on national level. We need to help the national FFNs do their job and speed up the process by sharing experience. And this regional expert meeting that you're part of now is one of our initiatives to stimulate and educate. But there are three other resources as well that we've produced: the Guide to Formation of National FFNs, the Clinical and Policy Toolkits, and the second edition of the book Geriatrics. And I want to tell you about those things, as well as commenting on the current regional expert meeting. The four pillars of the global call to action give structure to everything we do, including the programme for this regional expert meeting. You can't fail to have noticed that we've organised the agenda by the four pillars: multidisciplinary acute care, rehabilitation, long-term, secondary prevention, stopping the next fracture, and creating national alliances to achieve policy change. And the purpose of the regional expert meetings is to stimulate the formation of national FFNs that can drive these four pillars in people's own countries. So the first of the global resources is this book, which can be freely downloaded from the FFN website. The Guide to Formation of National FFNs, explaining why they're needed, explaining how to set them up, discussing how they work best, and discussing the things that they will then aim to actually do, the projects that they will undertake to bring about clinical improvement and policy improvement. This diagram explains the contents of the Guide to Formation. Entering where the green arrow is at the top, the first thing that's described in the publication is the rationale for setting up a national FFN, more or less what I've been talking about up to now. The next bit is to talk about how they can be initiated, who are the key people that need to be brought together, how to go about setting up an inaugural meeting which launches the national FFN. Then there's a long job of broadening and strengthening the national FFN with immediate targets of core associates and other health organisations, and then the later stages of sophistication, bringing in the leaders of the healthcare system, the payers and insurers, and eventually the national policy makers. Then we get on to describe the various projects that can be undertaken by the national FFN when they're ready to do so. We've gone into this in much more detail in the clinical toolkits, which I'll talk about next. But basically, it's a question of ensuring that there are agreed consensus standards and guidelines, and setting up possibly registries or audit systems that will help to drive positive change. The policy change is the subject of another toolkit which I will describe soon, and that is the whole business of advocacy. And that goes along with education, multidisciplinary education and workforce development, including the teaching of orthogeriatric principles, particularly in countries where there are not many geriatricians, but also involve multi-professional, involving nurses and physios and other allied health professionals alongside doctors. And then the book describes how the national FFN relates to other national FFNs, the regional meetings, and to the global FFN. And then we have a number of resources where you can get further information. So that is the content of the Guide to the Formation of National FFNs. So the second resource is these toolkits. These were funded by a grant from UCB, and they are being formally launched at the UCB sponsored symposium in the European Regional Expert Meeting. Although UCB supplied the resources for these toolkits, the editorial control was 100% under the FFN board and executive committee. And we've arranged to have these toolkits translated into Spanish, Arabic and Mandarin, and also Greek. The clinical toolkit, it basically talks about how to set up clinical services. It's all about service development, focusing on orthogeriatric co-management and secondary prevention through the established model of fracture liaison services. The policy toolkit is all about how to advocate, how to persuade one's colleagues, the managers and the politicians in order to achieve policy change that facilitates the implementation of the clinical service development. And this is free to download from the FFN website as a PDF, and there will be a web-based version of it on the FFN website that will be kept up to date. So the clinical toolkit is divided, like everything else, into the first three of the clinical pillars. And for each pillar, the section describes the evidence in favour of doing things in the multidisciplinary co-management way, clinical and cost effectiveness. Then there's a section on how you can map the current pathways and decide how you're going to stepwise implement a change towards a proper co-managed situation. Then there's a section on how you can benchmark your work, guidelines and standards and registries based on individual patient treatment process and outcomes. There's a discussion about how patient organisations can be involved in the development of clinical services, and a discussion about the resources that are needed to make the necessary change. Even though they may be cost saving in the long run, they will need resources to kick them off. The policy toolkit, here's the Spanish version of it, is all about the fourth pillar. It teaches how to successfully engage with policymakers. It gives a set of resources, tool templates which can be adapted for employment of orthogeriatric staff or fracture liaison nurses. And it's full of very powerful case studies showing how in different countries these advances have been made, which will no doubt stimulate everybody else to have good ideas about how to take things forward in their country. And there are links to many useful resources for further reading. And the third resource is this book, the second edition of Orthogeriatrics, the management of older patients with fragility fractures. Again, this is free to download because we have purchased the copyright, and this second edition, unlike the first edition, is free to download. It basically reports our distilled knowledge about all aspects of post-fracture care. The acute phase, the three pillars, the acute phase, the rehabilitation phase, and the secondary prevention phase. It again will be translated into multiple languages, including Greek. Make sure when you Google it, it's very easy to find. You just put in orthogeriatrics and then the publisher, Springer. But make sure you're looking at the second edition, because the first edition is not free to download. If you download the preface and chapter 1, you'll get a good overview of everything in the book, and all downloads, as I say, are free, but you can buy hard copy if you want to. So these are the three global resources that we're offering to activists in their own countries to help them be effective as national FFNs. Guide to Formation, toolkits, and orthogeriatrics textbook. You can get these resources right now. They're in the resource centre of this regional expert meeting, which you can find from the lobby. And it is also available from the FFN website, and the translated versions are available from the relevant national FFNs. So, in conclusion, we hope that you're going to leave this meeting with a desire to get active in your own country. Please keep in touch with us at the global level and the national FFNs in your region, and share your experience, because we can learn from you as well as you can learn from us. And please think about the most useful approach for future regional expert meetings like this, and let us know your ideas. Thank you very much.